Welcome to the Nidra podcast. In this episode, you will be meeting Amanda Sloat, a former White House advisor in the Biden administration. I wanted to connect with her around how she has maintained the level of intuition that guides her life to make choices that keep her within her well-being, whilst also achieving this high-level pressured and profile career that she has demonstrated. Her teachings brought through from her family and her life experiences are very relatable, and I think you'll really enjoy some of the aspects of intuitive decision making that we share in this episode. I'm really excited to be bringing in Amanda Sloat, who is a friend of mine who I met when I was co-teaching on a yoga retreat in Panama. And Amanda and I got on really well, doing surf lessons and jumping off of waterfalls and eating watermelon, I seem to remember. And so, it was just an easy friendship forming, which I always love those moments. And one of the things that really impressed me with Amanda when I first met her was that she had this high-flying career in the States, but was also clearly very intuitive and kind of very solid and grounded in balancing herself and kind of what was right for her with this drive for a big career. And I love it when I meet people like that because I'm always intrigued by how their intuition works and how they use it when they're managing really stressful big jobs that often pull many of us off kilter. And you don't have to have a big career to get pulled off of your intuition by stress. And so I'm really excited because Amanda's been visiting Australia and staying with me, and to get the opportunity to just chat with her a bit more about this specific part of who she is and how she dances with her intuition and some of those career choices that she's made in her life, but also other big choices. And she was willing to share and kind of bring out something a bit more personal about her that she doesn't normally do with her high profile life. So welcome, Amanda.
Only for you. Well, thank you for having me. And we have had a wonderful time in Sydney, and you were such a grounding presence on that yoga retreat in Panama, and I even brought you along with me in Australia when I was sleeping in a swag for the very first time with lots of noise in the campground and very cold nights. I played your Nidra podcasts and just loved your voice and everything you had to say, and it was very grounding. So it's been wonderful to have the chance to hang out with you in person, and appreciate the opportunity to join your podcast.
So it's up to you what you'd like to share in terms of your career and kind of what's that stress, because I think it's helpful for people just to understand like the level of stress that you've been met with in your career, and kind of also maybe some of the journey into that career, just from that box ticking life piece that most of us face.
Sure. So I have always been very interested in government and politics, and tell people I was the poster child for study abroad changing your life. Between my third and fourth year in university, spent 6 weeks in the UK, fell in love with Scotland, fell in love with Scottish politics, which expanded to European politics. So spent 7 years doing a PhD, working, getting experience in Europe. Then returned to Washington and spent 19 years working in various parts of the U.S. government. Worked in Congress for 4 years, advising the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee on European policy. Spent 5 years in the State Department during the Obama administration, and then up until a few months ago, spent 3 years in the Biden administration, where I was the senior official in the White House responsible for Europe policy. So both advising President Biden on European issues, including the war in Ukraine, and then running decision-making within the U.S. government on policy across the European continent. So the White House job was a a dream job, an amazing opportunity at a really important and historic period of time, but also came with a lot of pressures working at that level of government for the president as the ultimate principal in government, and also obviously a really difficult time in Europe with the war in Ukraine and burbling conflicts in other places as well.
And it's one of those things like, there's the obvious stress, right, of always being on call. There's never a day off because the world is going to continue to have events and things. And so that's kind of, I feel like, an obvious stress in your job. And I'm sure there's lots of other people who have other jobs which you don't really get a day off. I know when I worked in newspapers, there wasn't really a thing with days off. And so that I kind of feel like is something that I think a lot of people could connect to. But I feel like there's also, for you, when you're dealing with wars, it's like there's genuine life consequence, of what is happening to people's lives and the consequences that then arise from that. So that's a different level of stress that you're obviously under in those decision-making scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really heavy. You sometimes hear people say, "Oh, don't be so stressed. It's not brain surgery." And I was not physically responsible for doing surgery on somebody, but very definitely felt a sense of heaviness in the role and a sense of responsibility. A lot of us will read history, we'll read about World War II, we'll read about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I often had that sense of history being in these meeting rooms and thinking I am participating in these discussions that are going to have very real consequences for people's lives, and spending a lot of time talking to Ukrainians in particular, seeing the very real effects that they were suffering on the ground in terms of the war, while then being in the meeting rooms within government, making decisions about what types of weapons are we going to provide, what types of assistance are we going to give. I'd said to somebody I would wake up every morning and check my phone and wonder if a new war had started in Europe. There was an outbreak of hostilities between, again, from Azerbaijan and Armenia. There were some tense moments in the Balkans. We obviously had the October 7 events happen in Israel while I was in government, although I wasn't responsible for that portfolio. But there was this sense of world events are constantly happening. And when you're in these types of senior positions in government, you are the one that is responsible for contributing to decision making on those.
Yeah, and it's that piece, right, where you're having to advise. So I guess having moved from when you were, say, in think tanks where, you can have ideas and you can put things forwards, right? But you kind of, at the end of the day, you don't feel as engaged in the responsibility of those things being offered. Whereas there's a very different real consequence in terms of your body's stress of I'm making decisions and suggesting decisions to the president, to those senior who are talking in those final moments that you're having to experience in your body and then process, right? That degree of stress of consequence.
Absolutely.
And so how did that feel in your body?
I think the thing that I discovered in all of the jobs, but especially in this one, is the only way you can end up doing these jobs for an extended period of time is just to have very high levels of adrenaline and very high levels of cortisol. I look back now, and I guess we should say for those listening, I left my job at the end of November and have been on a wonderful world tour, which is culminating today with 2 months in Australia after 2 months in New Zealand. But a lot of this is just bringing my cortisol levels down. And so I look back now at the work that I was doing, which, like you said, was really being on call every single day. In the months before and after the Ukraine war started, I was in the office every single day, all day, starting my day at 6 a.m, often not getting home until 9 or 10 at night. We've been going to bed, I think, at about 9 o'clock every night this week. And I look back now and it's like, how was I still in the office at 9 o'clock at night? And I think the only way you survive that is to really be running on adrenaline and cortisol. And that obviously takes a toll on your body after a while. And so I have found with all of these government jobs that I have had that I need a period of time to just physically let the cortisol leave my body and to start to come back to a much more grounded place, because you're operating on much less sleep, on a much higher level of stress, and really just powering through. And I think the only way you can do that is with your body amping up the adrenaline.
Right. So, like your heart rate was super high, your blood pressure had gone up while you were doing the work, right? And obviously your breathing's a lot faster. So there's kind of all the natural stress signs that you're living in all the time, and that's to make your brain more alert and in theory make more rational choices. So as you're making those rational choices when you're under stress, and we haven't touched on kind of like what was Amanda like as a child and how were you like intuitive, because I'm like, I think it's interesting from that, and then we can see like how did you build into that. So when you were doing kind of that intensity, what were the things that you would do to kind of try and take care of that physical body, because you have the awareness to know that your body was under extreme stress and in high levels of cortisol, and you've been in and out of those government roles, so there's periods of taking care. So how did you manage that while you were under that stress?
Yeah, so this was my third stint in government, and it's also the third time that I have taken a sabbatical after an intensive period in government. So I think my work-life balance tends to be working very hard and then very heavily leaning into the life balance piece. And this is the first time I've done long travel during the sabbatical, but with all of them, I've really focused on spending time with family, on spending time with friends, on doing very, very healthy things for my body. And like to think that I have gotten better throughout these stints in government at working out what my body needs and how to take better care of myself. So coming into the job in the White House, I tried to do a couple of things. One, I had gotten in the habit during the pandemic of doing a 10-minute yoga practice every morning. There's loads of great online resources on YouTube. I did a lot of Sarah Beth and Five Parks yoga, yoga with Cassandra, and they were just little 10-minute blocks. And I would love to be the kind of person that could get up and do an hour-long yoga practice every single morning. I think that would be amazing, but I'm not. It was hard enough after going to bed late to get up in the morning to do it, but I found 10 minutes was a good chunk of time, because it's easy to commit to 10 minutes. You can do the 10 minutes. And I was actually surprised how long the 10 minutes felt once I was actually in the practice. And it was a really grounding, centering way to start my day. I would try and do it before I looked at the phone. And if nothing else, it gave me a sense of accomplishment before I even headed into the office that at least I had gotten a bit of a yoga practice. Second, I tried to get as much sleep as I could. That was challenging sometimes with the hours, but I've always been a person that's needed a lot of sleep, and so really tried to prioritize that. Third, I knew that my body would need healthy food, and I did not want to get into the habit, which is easy to do in these jobs, of getting French fries from the cafeteria at 8 o'clock when you're stuck at work late. So I would have a big bowl of oatmeal with fruit and nuts for breakfast. I would make salads to bring into the office for lunch, and then usually on Sunday afternoons I would make lentil soup or chili, and so I had a freezer full in the office of those. My staff told me a couple months ago that they would always watch what I was doing around 7 o'clock at night. If they saw me getting carrots and hummus out of the fridge, then they knew we were leaving soon, because I was just having a snack to tide me over. Once everybody heard the microwave going and the soup's defrosting, they knew that they were settling in for a long night in the office, which I hadn't even realized they were paying attention to what I was eating, but it makes sense, and that was definitely the pattern that I was in. Fourth, I guess, and finally was still trying to invest time in relationships, and seeing people and doing activities that brought me joy. I didn't necessarily have the time to do a lot of that. It was still COVID during a lot of the early time that I was in the White House, and I was really conscious of not putting myself in situations where I would be exposed and potentially get sick and be out of the office. And it was hard too, engaging with friends and being fully present in the way that I wanted to be, because there was always the back of my head wondering what was coming in on my phone. And it was less a I need to be obsessed with working all the time and more, oh my God, what if a war started? What if the president's looking for something? What if something has now happened or come up? People would generally call if it was that urgent, but I was always conscious of that. And then sometimes I would get calls and interrupted when I was trying to meet people, or I would be running late for things. So that part was much more challenging, but tried to maintain balance as much as I could in some of those physical practices.
It's funny, like two of those things really resonate for me, at least, which is the cooking, right?
Yes.
And cooking healthy food, because that's a really grounding activity. That's that connecting to earth through whole foods. And things like lentils are actually really great as well, especially if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, for helping you ground and like actually really having something nourishing in the stomach that activates the body into a much more grounded sense. So like really good food choices, and like vegetables, like especially root vegetables, helping again to that connection to ground and earth energetically, are really good when you're in a very mental job, when you're really, really stressed, to be eating those kind of foods. So it's really interesting, the food choices you're naturally making, and the act of cooking itself being very grounding as well. That use of the hands, touching something that's a natural substance like food. Your intuition, right, is really guiding you to take simple steps that are super grounding, and making food choices, again, that are going to not just feed you well and keep you healthy and strong, but also like energetically and emotionally really ground you and keep you in your best place for those high stress long nights, which is really impressive, because that's obviously, like you say, it's very easy for the food thing to go when you're super stressed. And then as a side note, I remember I hadn't been given a BlackBerry, because it was in those days where you had BlackBerry phones, and in one of my jobs, and it was when the Haiti earthquake happened, and it was this moment where they were like, I'd gone home on time for once. I'd decided to actually leave by 6 p.m. from the office. That's always
when the bad things happen.
Right, exactly. And, like coming back into the office and then being like, where have you been? This has been going on. The editor's been asking for you, and it was this panic. And it was this kind of like, you can never not have a phone. Why are you not answering your phone? And I was like, I don't have one. And they were like, within an hour there was a phone.
Quickly,
right? Within an hour there was a phone on my desk, and it was like, make sure you are always answering that phone. So I really resonate with that kind of like the phone relationship, and that feeling of, it's really hard to be with people when world events happen, and it's in your world to have to respond to things, and how that it's really hard. It is really hard, I think, with relationships and with connection, if you're not fully present to know kind of always what's going on, how to read people and give the appropriate responses. So, it can be really challenging for our relationships. And, I experienced that it was very destructive for my relationships. So it also points to your intuition in terms of you being aware that you weren't being fully present with those relationships, but trying to prioritize and still give them time. So what in your past...
Washington, D.C. is, there's a sufficient number of people that have those jobs that people are pretty sympathetic to. I found the further I went outside the Beltway, the less tolerant people tended to be. So it would be the discipline of, okay, can I put my phone down for an hour while you and I have lunch and really try hard to focus on you? And then after an hour, check my phone. So it was really just the frustration too in myself of not being able to be as present with people as I wanted, but trying to see if there was some way of setting healthy boundaries, or at least carving out a little bit of time to
Beautiful, yeah.
Have that space.
Self-boundaries, and that's the key, isn't it? Because it's self-discipline and self-boundaries. It's not that, the job isn't going to change, like, and at that level it can't. And I'm sure there's many other people who feel like they can't change their jobs. That's the way the business runs. And so it's, how do you make those boundaries for yourself so that you can really enjoy the relationships that you've got, because we need that connection. It fuels us and it makes us feel so much more self-worth and value when we actually have genuine connections. And so your ability to kind of recognize that that's what you were trying to carve out is really important. So I'm curious as to, how have you always connected with your intuition? Like, do you have a feeling sense? Is it like the weird moments of like, it's like you have a little message that like shines on, like I've, you know, because I've told to different people and everyone has their different way where they're like, that's how I know that this is like the choice for me, or this is how I know that like, oh my God, I'm entering something, this is not good, it's time to start reassessing stuff. So, you know, like what is it in you that has that, it's time to put those boundaries in place, Amanda, it's time to turn away from this scenario and start looking at another sabbatical time or whatever.
Yeah. I think I've always had a gut sense. What is hard for me is I am an extremely rational person. Working in government is often the world of the rational. And so tapping into the emotional piece has always been more challenging for me. My father was a psychologist who, of course, spent his life helping people understand their feelings. And so to have this child that didn't want to talk about feelings but wanted to talk about everything else that was going on drove him a little bit crazy. So my father was not a yoga person, although I think he would have been good, and I've said he had this sense of yogi wisdom about him. And so I think a lot of these things I really learned from him growing up. He in his practice would talk about helping people, you know, be free to be. And he would always encourage me to focus on my being side rather than my doing side. Mm-hmm. So he was very proud of the government work and everything I was doing, but would remind me to focus on that other part, the just being. He would talk about people, you know, having a sense of what felt right to do and the problems we can create for ourselves when we get caught in the shoulds rather than what feels right. And so talked a lot about this sense of tapping into what we were feeling inside. You know, he would talk about putting as few conditions as possible on your happiness, which I liked. You know, if you said, I'm only going to be happy if it's sunny today, you're setting yourself up for a grumpy day because it's not going to be sunny. He talked about, you know, life being about choosing what set of problems you want to have, right? Nothing's perfect. You know, you're without kids, you know, maybe you have regrets or you're lonely. You have kids, you never sleep, and you have a hard time to do yoga, and, you know, life is crazy. You take one job and you have a long commute. You take another job and maybe the boss isn't as good. Like nothing is going to be perfect, and so it's figuring out what set of challenges you want to have. And then the other piece is this idea of trusting the process and really believing that things are going to work out. So, you know, I think I developed a lot of that from him just throughout my life. And then, you know, coming into the practice of yoga was really helpful as well. You know, I think I initially came into yoga as a physical practice, like a lot of people do, but then really started taking on board a lot of the healthy eating, the healthy aspects, the yoga as a practice of coming to your mat and being okay with falling down and getting up and starting over, and really using that as a way to try and ground down and tap into this wisdom. You know, I think the first 2 times that I took sabbaticals was coming out of yoga retreats. And I think I had this intuitive sense inside, but my head tends to fight back with a lot of shoulds. And so I have found yoga retreats and yoga classes as a good space to get away and just be quiet and still the voices in my head and really tap into that gut feeling inside.
And you feel it very much in your belly.
Yeah, that is definitely the place where things live, where things are either happy or my belly is telling me that I need to stop listening to my brain and do something different. So it's very much a gut sense for me.
What an awesome dad.
He was amazing. He was amazing.
Very, very wise parent to impart all that wisdom for you to kind of work out how you embody it, you know, like it's also that difference between having someone tell us something and kind of, especially if you're a rational person like you are, like mentally kind of cognitively be like, oh yeah, I get that. But actually when you start feeling it in your body, it's very different, which is why I ask about the gut, right? Like it's the feeling in the gut. It's the going, oh, hang on a minute, I'm shooting like that. I just need to set that aside and go and do something where I'm feeling my belly and like what's going on in my body, like so going for a walk, right, and taking those steps to recognize, oh, I'm in my head, how can I kind of like quieten things down, and then see what's feeling, right, and allow some of that wisdom to really be in your body, and that's the being, right, that he's been encouraging that connection, and that beingness. I think when you're such a rational person, and I find it funny because the whole of my family are so rational, and I'm considered such an emotional person. And when I left my ex-husband, one of my friends that I lived with, he laughed at me when I was kind of saying like, oh, I'm the emotional, like little feeling person. He was like, Nid, on the scale of normal people, like you're still pretty up there with the hyper rational people. And I was like, oh, because in my family, I'm so not the rational person, but I've grown up with it. I've learned it, like, and there is a large part of me that really connects to that being in the mind and how fun it is. Like, there's a lot of really interesting things. And I lost my path totally because I was enjoying the intellectual pursuit of being a lawyer.
Right.
And I was more interested in the intellectual pursuit of that and the fulfillment of that than I really was the gut feeling that, like, I had sold my soul to working for a not very nice empire. And there was physiological things for me that started showing up. So do you find that you get kind of like the physical things happening in your body as well, and does that stop you and kind of go, hang on a minute, I need to spend a bit more time being?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of what happened ahead of my decision to leave the job at the end of last year. I had been in the job for almost 3 years, which was one of the longest people to have been in that position. A lot of people will do 1 year, 2 years, so I was already at the longer end of that. They were trying to solidify their team for the fourth and final year of the Biden administration. And so I had to sit down and have a serious conversation with myself about whether I thought that I could actually keep going at this pace for another 16 months or so. And I was tired. I could have kept doing it if I needed to, but I really had a sense in my body that it was time. It was time physically, it was time mentally, emotionally, it was time. I was tired. And I think just the long-term effects of the cortisol and operating at that level of adrenaline were just really starting to take a toll. And it's been interesting to me, speaking of politics, to look around at other leaders. You've got New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who made headlines talking about not having enough gas left in the tank. A couple months ago, the Irish Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, stepped down and said he was done. And I think it's healthy that you have political leaders operating at these levels who give these jobs their all. They're not saying they're overwhelmed or burned out, and there's obviously political factors happening, but there is an increasing recognition that we need to take care of our bodies, and there is more to life than just churning out in these jobs as well. And so I think the examples of that have also been really inspiring, and I hope inspire more people to make similar decisions when they reach the point where they realize that they need a shift.
Yeah, and that really is, it's very easy to get caught up in our other life responsibilities and make them reasons why we can't make that shift, and to be like, but I need to do this and I need to do this and I've got to kind of carry the world on my shoulders and therefore I can't make that shift. But then often we get more and more sick, or whatever the thing is that's showing up in your body that you're not in a great place. For me, it was definitely all my relationships fell apart. That was my big obvious sign that things were going really badly. And it's, you can only keep letting that happen and keep making the excuses to keep going, because otherwise, like, the universe is just going to be like, smash, it's all going to fall apart, right? And that comes to your dad's point about trusting the process. Is like how you make that big leap of faith, right? To have a sabbatical, to be like, what happens next? Like, to send yourself off traveling, kind of open to, I don't know what is happening, is that trust in the process, and is that big leap away from staying in responsibilities where it's comfortably uncomfortable. And your intuition's going, no, I really need to break free And so how is trusting in the process going?
So this is the third time that I have taken time off after a job. So I have made the leap before, and I have always found gainful employment on the other side of it. What you were saying made me think, I don't have kids, I'm not married, so I don't have financial or physical responsibility for other people, which has given me the freedom to be able to do things like this, which I'm grateful for. It was a weird experience, especially when I first left my first job in 2010, to exist in DC voluntarily unemployed. You go to the receptions and people are like, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch where you said you worked." It's like, I didn't say. And they're like, "I don't know, like, are you important? Are you going to be important in the future? Like, I don't know what box to put you in." And I think things, over the last 14, 15 years since I first did that, more people are leaving jobs and are getting more comfortable with the uncertainty, which is good. I have never done anything like this current sabbatical that I'm on. I did a 6-week trip right after I left my job. I spent a month in India, including a week at an Ayurveda center, which was extremely restorative. Having 2 people give you massages for 2 hours every day.
Yes.
Better if that doesn't relax you, then you may be a lost cause. I spent New Year's in Goa. And then went on to Sri Lanka and the Maldives. But it was really sitting on that beach in Goa where I was like, what my intuition is telling me is I want to keep traveling. And it was really annoying to pay rent. And so I went home and packed up my apartment and bought a one-way ticket to New Zealand, which for me, that was just a big throwing myself out into this big black abyss and was a bit of a scary move.
Ask, what was the feeling in your body when you made that decision then, that one-way ticket?
So I was sitting in Goa, which, gets back to what I was talking about earlier, that yoga retreats. I often go into yoga retreats, I think sort of knowing in my gut what the decision is, but I need to get in a space where I can quiet my brain and really tap into what I'm thinking and then affirm what that gut feeling is. And so I was in Goa on New Year's and journaling and was like, I want to keep traveling. I don't want to be in DC right now. I need to get out. And so New Year's Eve, I was very clear on my vision and what I wanted to do. I woke up on New Year's Day in a complete panic. I don't know if my brain was asleep on New Year's Eve, but all of a sudden my brain was like, no, here I am. Wait a minute. What about this? What about this? What about this? And so I had to spend New Year's Day having another round of brain-gut conversations to get back to where I knew my gut was before. And so once my inside parts all reconciled themselves, then it was smooth going forward, and then I definitely had the knowing in my gut, and I had brought my brain around on that one. And the trip's been amazing, but it really has been a practice. I mean, open-ended traveling is very different from doing a 2-week vacation. I'm constantly having to make decisions about, do I go to this place? Do I go to that place? How long do I stay here? I'm continuing to have those gut-brain fights over what my gut wants to do versus what my brain thinks that I should do. So I feel like this trip, in as much as it's fun and relaxing and seeing friends, is also the universe saying, okay, there's some life lessons that you still have not learned. And so we're going to use what's ultimately, a fairly low cost, inconsequential. It doesn't really matter if I stay in X town tonight or X town tomorrow, or if I stay in Sydney for 7 nights versus 8 nights. But it's a practice at getting better about trusting my intuition on things, getting my thinking brain under control, and really leaning into trusting the process and knowing things are gonna work out as they need to.
And I think that's really beautiful that you're aware that that's the process you're in, and you've alleviated that severe stress, right, of the previous 3 years to give yourself space to practice now from within you. And what it reminds me of when you're saying about the gut and the head, I teach a figure 8 of intuition. And it's used a lot in kind of Chinese medicine approaches as well, which is that we have three parts of us that make decisions, and we need all of them to work together. And so the heart is kind of where the soul speaks. Like the heart is what makes us go, oh, this lights me up. This is what's going to fulfill me. Like this is where, like, you know, the dream kind of comes, like whether it's the man, the job, the place, like, you know, it's what fulfills, right? It's your expression. And so that generally has the like response of like, oh yeah, I want to go to New Zealand, right? It's like, yes. And that's the heart. And then the mind has the kind of like response, right? And sometimes, and this is where I always find it interesting to ask someone, where does your intuition come from? Because some people feel like it comes into the mind as like inspiration. And so sometimes the mind can come in with like, oh yeah, and that's an idea, and that's an idea. Or it can come in with the kind of like, how's that going to work? That, like, you know, there's a problem there. And that's what the mind is there for, right? It's to unlock potential and where can you go and research and find out more. So it's like to open up possibility, but the mind is also there to keep us safe and to make sure we're being sensible and taking care of ourselves. So the mind has a two-part dance that it has to work through in that process. And so we need to understand which side of the fence are we on with our mind. And it differs depending on what it is we're doing in life, because some things we might have more trust in. And so that opening up possibilities can happen. And sometimes we need to learn to take better care of ourselves. And so that control kind of piece comes in. And then you have the gut. And the gut is actually our place of courage. So the gut is where it's like, am I taking a courageous step? And is there something else in this that is why I shouldn't take a step, right? Like there's a reason why, you know, you see that guy and he's like, he puts butterflies in your stomach in a good way, or there's a reason why you look at that other guy and you go, ooh, I'm not sure about him, but I'm kind of like, he's really hot, but he's kind of like bad hot, you know, and it's like, and then the bad hot turns out to be the disaster nightmare man from hell, and the butterfly guy is like this absolute delight, you know, and that's what the gut is telling us. The gut also is helping us with courage of like, is this, I'm moving forwards courageously, but it also can tell us like, that's also really mucky way to do it, or there's a nicer way to do it, right? And so the gut has this role, but it's to do with courage. And sometimes we need more from the mind for the courage to happen. So sometimes we don't have enough in the mind and the clarity in the mind or quiet in the mind for that gut courage to really settle and calm. Because if the mind is too much in that kind of, it's not possible, there's all these things that need to happen, the gut can't settle and go, it's okay, we got this. You're grounded, you're solid, you can take the steps. And that's where the trust and the faith comes in. And then it lifts back into the heart, and the heart goes, yeah, we got trust and we got faith and we can move forwards. So there's this dance between these three parts of ourselves that we all have to move through. And the dance isn't the same depending on the situation, depending on your life experiences that your body has and your mind have to process, of kind of like, do I trust that previous experience? Do I trust that it can be different in the future? And how do I rewire some of those thinking ways in my brain so that my gut can be like, yeah, this is good. And yoga and, you know, breathing practices, anything that brings us into our body is going to help us move through some of that, because the body can kind of work out like some of those old memory patterns and release some of the memory patterns so that the mind doesn't have that same hold and it softens. Right? And that's what you're saying for you, that place is that softening of the mind so that the gut can be like, yeah, we got this, it's okay. So it's really interesting that like for you, your experience is that dance between them, and that is playing out in the travel.
Right. Well, and it's interesting, the heart piece of it, because I think ultimately the decisions that I had made to take the time off, certainly to take this time off, was to nurture the heart. And I hadn't thought about it in that way, but that really what it was. And I think part of it gets back to what I was talking about before with frustration about not fully being present with people. And so the last two sabbaticals I took, you know, my sister had her second baby, and I was able to just go to her house for 2 weeks and entertain the old one, hold the baby, and there was nothing in the back of my head worrying about work because I wasn't working. I had another friend who had a baby, and you know, we spent a week sitting on her couch watching Stranger Things and shows on Netflix, and I got baby snuggles, and she got to take a shower, and so it was showing up and being present for people, which was then also really nurturing for me. And I have found on this trip it's like my inner child wants to come out and play. So I've been doing the hikes and, the dives and, seeing the Sydney Opera House and just running around and opening up my eyes to all of these new experiences and activities, which I was able to do in small amounts in my job, but not as much as I wanted. And I'm sure a lot of people have done that wheel of life that often comes up on yoga retreats where you have to score your health and your relationship and your finances, and generally felt okay with those things. But it was always the joy and the creativity that was less. And that was the thing that I ended up prioritizing the least, or just practically didn't have time to do. And so I'm making up for lost time, I think, on this. When I leave Sydney, I'm going to head to Indonesia and tick off the number one thing on my bucket list, which is seeing the orangutans, which is going to bring me so much joy and is something that I've been really interested in. And so I'm really just, I think, nurturing my inner child and giving myself the opportunity to have a lot of these experiences. And frankly, especially in a place like Washington, it's good to get out of the bubble and remind yourself that there is just a whole bigger world out there, and there's lots of different ways of living. There's lots of things to see and do. And my professional life, my career has always been really important. But my dad passed away 5 years ago, which was a very stark reminder that life is also short, and that you need to get out and enjoy the people, enjoy the moments, and experience the joy and the beauty in the world as well. So that's been a lot of what I've been enjoying doing in this trip.
Oh, thank you so much, Amanda. It's a real reminder of the importance of the heart and of relationships and of connection with people, and that you need the connection with your body in order to be able to connect with people. And that no matter what all those stresses are around us, that, we can do all these sensible things that are strategies, but at the end of the day, really giving time and prioritizing time to connect with your inner child, and that joy helps you connect with those relationships, right? And then we nourish each other when we take care of that inner child, that creativity, and then we can really play with other people, right? And that, to me, and it's often what I'm shown in my work is that, we're here to play. It's kind of I'm not particularly Christian myself, but, it's we're all God's children. What are children? Children are meant to play. So we are here to play and have fun with one another. And it's so wonderful seeing you in this joyful place where you're reconnecting with that side of yourself and really giving it the space. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen in your next steps of your travel and your life, and obviously your career sits within that, but more importantly, just seeing you really giving yourself to this time and the space to be in that joyfulness that you are, and the pleasure that brings everyone that you spend time with. So I'm just really grateful and enjoying your adventures, and may you have the most fun time with the orangutans. I can't wait for the pictures.
So excited. Ever since I was 5 years old with my Fisher-Price camera, I've been obsessed with the orangutans, and I'm so excited to go and see them. And I will continue to take Nidra along, so when I am sleeping in a long house with mosquitoes and, men snoring and the rest, it'll be a very grounding, and I am sure I will continue to have moments of panicking and angsty about decision, and so we'll tap back into your grounding wisdom as well on this journey.
It's there for the taking. Thank you so much, sweetheart.
Thank you so much for having me.